It usually takes a minute for anybody to get on here.
Yeah, I always give my folks a minute or two. I had
Yeah.
somebody say to me one time, Chris, why do you just sit there awkwardly? I was like, because people aren't watching me. Like, I'm giving people time to get on.
But now the people on the replay get the awkward. But hey, we'll just
That's
we,
fine. They
we
should
do.
have been here live.
This is time for lively banter, Chris. But I just can't think of anything livelier.
I think the awkward pre-show is like the penance that replay people have to pay for not being here live. So
That's
if you're watching this wondering when we're going to talk about something meaningful, you should have been here live.
that's right. Well, not necessarily because now there's somebody on. We got at
Oh,
least
well,
one.
welcome.
We can go. So
Welcome
if
to the
you,
meaningful part of the conversation.
yeah, come on in, join us. We've got a couple of people. Just let us know where you're watching from, and we're going to get started. I don't want to keep you too long, Chris. I know you've got things going on today, and but you had agreed to be on with us at the beginning of the month, and then you lost your voice again. We've decided
Again.
he's abusing his voice by using it too much or wrongly. So, anyway, we are here today. We're going to talk about domestic abuse in the church. And both he and I are noticing some trends, and we wanted to talk a little bit about that, the outrage of what's going on. Yes. And have we both felt outraged at things that
Yeah.
have happened in the church in their response to domestic abuse, Chris? I know I have.
Well, yeah.
I want to talk a little bit. I know you talked about it this morning on your Peaceworks page. So maybe
Yeah.
you just give us a little recap of what you have were saying because I think that's kind of what we're talking about here today.
Yeah. So I didn't know we were going to be doing as much overlap, but maybe it's just where the the Holy Spirit has taken us because it is a frustrating prospect. Like I get the frustration with the church. And I think I'm in a unique position even recently. I've just seen kind of the nasty underbelly of the church recently. And especially politically and from a leadership perspective, it's been really discouraging. So I get the the angry rhetoric. I get the distrust of the institutional church. My rant this morning was basically to guard us as helpers against devouring each other. That sometimes I feel like as helpers, we build these silos based on our own personal experience or our own preferences or our own philosophical or theological frameworks. And in doing so, we insulate ourselves from really valuable help and we end up attacking folks who are actually doing good work. And I think there's a role for activism. I really do. I think there's a role for, as we were talking offline, a prophetic voice. I think there's a role for righteous anger. I think sometimes when all and pardon me if this is too far for some of you guys, but I think sometimes if all we have is a hammer, everybody looks like a nail. And so we just go around swinging rather than compassionately and contextually talking and working together. I think we have a lot more in common than we do what divides us. And so that's a real heartbeat of mine. I know it's a heartbeat for Called to Peace because we have to be unified on the majors in order to get the work done.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, coming out of domestic abuse and seeing how little the church knew or cared about knowing about
Yeah.
domestic abuse was really hard for me. And I had a lot of anger for a long time. But what I have found is that sometimes my anger was actually counterproductive. It actually worked against me because if I go in and I'm just, basically pointing my finger at the church and what they've done
Yeah.
wrong, then they're not going to want to listen to me.
Right.
Well, this angry victim, this angry survivor, whatever you want to call me, they don't want to listen to that. And so we were talking about this too before we turned on the video or went live. I actually went to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, which back in I don't know what years those were, probably the 1990s, they had what we call the conservative resurgence. And what happened?
All the way back in the 1990s.
Yes. Well, anyway, the conservative resurgence happened as a result of conservatives coming in among people who were more liberal than they were, and basically starting a groundswell and a grassroots movement within the organization. And so you and I, we've done this a long time, and we have actually seen change. We've been on this path for a long time. It's been
Yeah.
probably 24, 25 years for me now. And
Mhm.
you, how many?
Oh, 16, 17.
Yeah, because you're so much younger. But
Yeah.
he
Well,
was he was a babe before that. But but anyway, when I first started this, nobody was listening, and I felt like I was just playing a tune, and nobody was listening. And just in the last 4 to 5 years, what a difference we're
yeah.
seeing, because we're trying to work within the systems, the broken systems. Yes, they're broken, but it bothers me to see so many survivors getting upset because perhaps we were associated with a group that doesn't believe the same, doesn't have doctrine, and may not understand what we understand about
Mhm.
domestic abuse. Maybe
Right.
they might have some doctrines that we consider harmful to victims of domestic abuse, but is that a reason to completely write them off? That means that we are cutting off our own influence.
Yeah. I think there's a balance. I mean, there's always a balance to it. Like, there are times where the prophetic voice is the only voice we have. I think we saw this most recently in the Southern Baptist. For how many years did SBC victims plead and beg and speak prophetically? And that anger had a result that was positive. Now, when you see, even though we're all frustrated with some of the tertiary things, I think to see the messengers respond the way they did um, shows us that people are listening. So there's always a role for the prophetic voice. However, the prophetic voice is always temporary, right? When there's a response. And so it's like we were talking offline as well. Sometimes I think there's this balance to be held between Jonah and Jeremiah. I mean, there's definitely a longing to see repentance like Jeremiah had. And then often there's an anger to see justice like Jonah had. And we have to hold that relatively balanced and understand that the prophetic role is only part of what God gave the church. He gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be shepherds, and some to be teachers. And so, for folks like maybe you and I who have been called into more of a shepherding role, uh, we don't have the privilege necessarily of being aggressive all the time. There's a time to be aggressive, but there's also a time to educate, a time to hold some people's hands, a time to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And so I think there is a balance to this. And the last thing I'll say on this, Joy, is for me, the heartache is when the aggression and the anger is turned towards people who are legitimate helpers, and you're like, there's plenty of folks to be upset with. I mean, we've got the enemy of the saints coming after us. We've got institutional power that's at play. We've got the collective socialization of men that's at work. We've got theological problems that are certainly here, hurting us. But for crying out loud, there's great advocates doing great work that I don't agree with. And guess what? You're not going to hear me slam you. Keep doing great work, right?
Yeah.
Let Jesus sort that out. I'm
Yes.
to see victims safe.
Yeah, me too. Well, here's the thing. I just think it's an Ephesians body of Christ thing that we are
Yeah.
all called to different things. And some people, we've had talks about this before. They think that there's, doctrine. Doctrine's going to solve the problem. If everybody became an egalitarian, if everybody would change their policies on certain things,
Right.
then everything would be okay. And we know, as advocates for victims of domestic abuse, that that's not going to change the problem. We're looking at heart issues.
Right.
We are looking at a lack of knowledge that harms victims of domestic abuse. And so what we want to do is we want to educate people on the dynamics, because for me, the big issue here is that our churches don't recognize it as abuse,
Yeah.
just like many of us victims don't even recognize what we're going through as
Right.
abuse. And until we recognize it, we certainly can't address it. And so that's what my heart is. Call to Peace Ministries. We want to get in and we want to help educate the churches. I know that's your heart,
Mhm.
because that's when they start to wake up, is when they start to recognize the magnitude of the problem and the impacts. The impacts are
Yeah.
severe for women and children. And that is our heart's cry, is to get out there and to make a difference, to wake people up. And
Yeah.
just telling them that you need to change your doctrine isn't going to do that.
Well, I'll give you an example that I think might add some clarity. You know, you were talking about how we've evolved over the years. I couldn't agree more. When I first started traveling and teaching on this topic, it would be, and I used to warn folks when they would have me come in, especially for awareness, when they would say, you know, we want you to come and do a domestic abuse conference. And they would have these really high goals, like we want to see 100 people at this. And I would like, really need to have low expectations because not many people are coming to a domestic abuse conference. And most of them, I remember early on, and Joy, you can probably totally resonate with this. I would go someplace to speak, and they would invite every pastor in their town, they would invite every counselor in the area, and there would be 25 people there, and I bet 15 to 20 of them were victims or survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And which was fine. And I was happy to teach and train and be part of that early work, and rarely any men. But now, 10 years later, or more, I guess, more than 10 years. Wow. I'm traveling and the room is half full of men, and there's men engaging, and there's pastors that are there. And it's like super encouraging to
Yeah.
see the movement that we have seen. Um, but sharing space is hard, and sharing space with folks who are still ignorant is hard. And it grates on me a little bit. I'll be honest. It's hard to answer the same questions over and over and over. It's hard to tackle the same forms of dissidence over and over and over, but that's necessary. That's why when you said education, I couldn't agree more. That's how you properly address ignorance. Now, when it's willful ignorance and when it's people who are deliberate and intentional and malicious, yeah, there's a totally different approach. But when it's can be addressed with education, then that's what we want to do. We want to speak truth. And sometimes we speak it in aggressive, no nonsense ways. Sometimes we speak it in winsome ways. And I would say the latter is much more powerful for the general population than the former, even though sometimes we have to speak um, in aggressive ways because we're confronting an enemy, for lack of a better word, or we're confronting resistance.
Yeah, and that's I put Hosea 4:6. People perish for a lack of knowledge, and we know that to be true. And so that is our calling, is to educate, to help people understand what's going on, the impacts. You've got Peaceworks University, we've got the advocacy training, and until we can actually raise awareness and knowledge, I really don't see us overcoming by just getting outraged and just criticizing policies. I feel like we've just become too much like the world. It's so easy to find out what's wrong with somebody, but let's go in
Right.
and help them get it right.
Yeah.
Um,
You know,
so
one of our viewers, has asked if we've seen, an increase in resources and networking, and I would say exponentially. Like beyond my
yeah,
wildest dreams, we have more resources and networking now. I'm not sure I ever thought it was possible. I honestly think if we could go back in time and tell, let's just say Kathy Krager, who I think Kathy would be dancing with joy over
hmm
the resources we have. And we could go back in time and we could tell Kathy, hey, Dr. Krager, there's going to be multiple books from a conservative perspective. There's going to be conferences focusing on domestic abuse. I bet she would doubt us. I bet she would say, nah, there's no way. You guys aren't going to get this right. And then look at what's happening. So I would say that's a tremendous movement. But what we have to recognize is we need voices in different places that maybe you and I can't speak to.
right.
And I was just teaching in an Anabaptist community over the weekend, last weekend, and the Mennonite church, the Amish church, they need voices that maybe you and I can't speak into. And so I'm thrilled, right? When I have Pentecostal brothers and sisters, Nazarene brothers and sisters, Reformed brothers and sisters, Anabaptist brothers and sisters stepping into the work because they have a voice that I don't have.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, even so, I have told people before, I feel like God has given us, you and me, we both have voices that can speak to more conservative Christians, evangelical Christians,
Right.
than Kathy Kroger could have done, or
Yeah.
Craig.
Traeger.
Um, yeah,
Yep.
I know. It's just always, it looks like Kroger to me.
It does look like Kroger's.
But anyway, and also Janet saying that Kath, Catherine was the first person who understood the spiritual abuse she was enduring. And see, she had it right. But me, when I was coming out as a victim of abuse, I had come out of such a conservative culture that I kind of was very skeptical about her book
Right.
because oh my goodness, you know, she's this woman and I think she's a feminist, and you can't be a feminist and a Christian, right? That's the way
Yeah.
and so yeah, so but now because of my history, because of my training, my seminary training, I have a voice with more conservative circles. You do too. I mean, I'm not the ultra conservatives. I don't. But so here's the thing that I have been seeing, and it saddens me to see. I've had people comment that if so and so is associated with a particular organization, association that has not handled abuse well, then we get thrown under the bus because we're having some association with them, and we're
Mhm.
just trying to help them understand. I said I will go
Yeah.
wherever they ask me to speak because I want them to have good knowledge, and they're going to call somebody who might not know anything about it, and then they've
Yeah.
got thousands and thousands of people following them.
I get that too. I get that to a degree. I mean, I've had several occasions where I'll get called by a church. This happened quite a bit actually, to come and train their elders or train their leaders or do some case review because they did mismanage things so bad. And inevitably, I'll get an email that's kind of angry. Why would you go there? Don't you know they messed up? And I'm like, well, that's why they asked me. Like, that's why I'm going.
Yeah.
They messed up so bad they wanted some help, and I happen to be the guy who's going to go help.
Yeah.
So just slowing down for a minute and recognizing this is this is a natural part of the process of not infiltrating the church, but expanding the church's awareness. Going back to Kathy for just a second, we wouldn't be where we are if peace and safety in the Christian home had not done what it did.
Mm-hmm.
And if Faith Trust had not done what they had done, if Marie and her group had not done what they had done. So all of these things are like these building blocks that have allowed us as kind of evangelical voices to take the next step. And there's somebody that's going to come up after us that are going to be the next evangelical voices that are going to take it the next step. It was like I was listening to Darby on a podcast this morning, and I was just praising God that Darby has a platform. Praise God for that. I mean, I hope people pass her book all around the world, and I hope she gets a larger platform than I ever had because
Mm-hmm.
she's such a valuable voice. And then guess what? Somebody's going to come after Darby. So, 20 years from now, like we've said for how many years now, 20 years from now, the church can be the safest place. But it begins with, our voice and that next step of shepherding and helping and teaching and educating and confronting sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, like again, we need those voices. But I have a friend who has one of those louder voices, and she and I have had debates on name call, calling people out by name and things like that. But I finally just said to her one day, I said, it's like good cop, bad cop. I'm the good cop. It's like
Yeah.
I will go in and help them clean up after you have laid them to shreds. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, but
Sometimes I'm the bad cop, but I try to do it in a really
yeah,
nice way.
well, that's what I
'Cause I'm the
mean.
pacifist bad cop. I don't have a gun.
Yeah, but anyway, so we know that I just hope that we will learn to show one another grace and understand the different callings that we have and
Yeah,
understand that it's made a difference. Chris, you have been speaking out in biblical counseling circles, and I have just been so pleased. Now there are parts and elements
sure.
within biblical counseling who still don't get it. But I just went to the CCF conference. It was amazing how trauma informed and how pro it was basically pro support victims. And so I love that. And then the
Hmm.
ABC conference has had these wonderful domestic abuse tracks. And so we're seeing, and my blog post just got published at Biblical Counseling
The Counseling
Coalition.
Coalition. Yeah,
So they have changed tremendously. And I wanted to say, it feels like just 3 or 4 years, we have seen an avalanche of change, but we've been in
yeah,
there tilling the soil. And that's the way we're going to actually make a difference in the church. Abby's talking about how she's a part of the Latter-day Saints church. And so her church really did her harm. And now
Yeah.
God is calling her to go back in and to be a voice. And when we can do that, how powerful is that? When we can do it in love and not go in with condemnation, because that's not going to help anybody get it. Nobody's going to want to listen to you if you come in with your guns pointed. I'm
Guns
sorry.
blazing. Yeah.
And so there was a question here. I didn't want to miss it. Okay, Helen Mary says, if we need to offer introductory resources to a pastor or church, where should we start for an entry level enlightenment? So I will say your Peaceworks University, if they want to do something and be a part of it and continually get educated. Call to Peace has free quarterly training. So we got one coming up next month called Protect the Flock,
Yep.
just a basic one. And then you and Julie Owens, Dr. Deborah, and I did a webinar that's available on House of Peace Publications
Yep.
on how to present to your pastors in a way.
Yep.
You've got to do this in a way so that they are willing to receive you. It's so
Yeah.
important.
I mean, from an ongoing training perspective, Peaceworks University, Equip, those are great resources for ongoing training. But anytime you can connect to like a Protect the Flock training, or becoming a church that cares well for the abused is another free thing that's out there. It's an embarrassment of riches, Joy. Like 10 years ago, you'd be lucky to find an article, on domestic abuse and the evangelical church. And now we have, I mean, annual conferences and training events, and things are just growing.
Yeah.
And just even trying to balance that between all of us that are kind of on the same text threads, and trying to find a way to balance all of the wonderful things that are out there. Like, that's our biggest problem. Are you kidding me? That's our biggest problem.
Yeah.
So being able to balance that, and then understand that not everybody's on the same page. Like, there's some learning that we're still doing. And that's why I stay connected to certain organizations. People will have different experiences from different places, right? And as long as I can stay connected, I'll stay connected. If I can't, I will publicly let people know why. But that's one of the rich things that we find now, is in all the unity and diversity, the conversations are happening that never happened before.
Yeah. And so Julie says CCF does not get it, personal experience. So Julie, I want you to know that there are going to be people in every organization that don't get it. But what I'm saying is I have seen so much. I went to that conference and I saw so many things that were trauma informed that were just amazing. Even a man named Michael Jimbola did a thing on divorce and
Right.
being
Yeah. You were telling me about that.
God. Oh, it's amazing. God's mercy to those who are afflicted. And
Yep.
so, and then Darby did one on the counselor is advocate, and then Julie Lowe did. Was that her name?
Yeah, Julie Lowe. She does a great job
He had
with
two
children,
really good ones.
and she's starting to evolve in some ways too. Even Jeffrey Black back in the 90s had some things that were like building blocks in my life from teaching. And that's one of the things that, like, listening and learning. Like, I think about Julie Owens' dad, Robert. I mean, I would call Robert Owens an advocate. I would call him a shepherd of the abuse, but I don't know that that Pastor Owens would ever be considered like an expert on domestic abuse. But he was such a godly pastor, the pastor's heart, that if it wasn't for Robert, and I've told Julie this, I don't know that I would have got permission to be a pastor in this work. And so I think if Pastor Owens was still around, he might say, "Oh, Chris has surpassed me in this way or this way." But the reality is, if Pastor Owens wasn't there, would I have taken the next step? Because it was really him that gave me permission to say, yeah, you can get in this work and do this work. And so that's why I'm like, everybody's evolving, everyone's moving, hopefully moving forward.
Yeah. And Lisa has a good question. Don't you think it can do damage to yourself when they are clearly wolves and hard-hearted and go back? Yes.
Oh, sure.
And so we
Sure.
talk about, in our advocacy courses about who, when they are receptive, when they're not, when to like shake the dust off your feet. There are times, and there are times for this. There's a time for everything. There's a time to try to get along and work with them and to help give them the resources that they need. We've had amazing responses to our church partnership program. We have 3 pastors on staff part-time now who will go in and speak to other pastors, and
Yeah,
somehow it's just easier for them to get through than for me as a woman to
it
get
is.
in and talk to them. So we've had amazing responses, and it's helped women. But yes, there are times when the churches are just not going to be responsive, and those are the ones we shake the dust off our feet. So
And I think that's really, maybe I'll present this, maybe Joy, you can clarify if I'm misrepresenting you, but I think that's really our heartbeat is we want to save the power of righteous anger
yeah,
for those who need it, right? And I think sometimes we throw it at everyone. And there are some folks that they don't need that righteous anger because they are moving in a good direction. They may not be where we are. They may still be in process. They may not even be safe, if this makes sense, but they're moving towards being safe. And so we work and we educate. And that's why I think prophetic voices are so much more powerful when they're targeted at the right place. And I'll go back to the SBC. I think, if we've been following the Southern Baptist Convention, many of us have had righteous anger. And we've chosen to approach it maybe differently, but all of us have come away with an Ephesians 4 type of response that says, okay, this is not sinful anger. This is righteous anger, and something must be said, and it must be said in a very direct and firm way. So yeah, no, I would agree with you. I think there's definitely wolves in sheep clothing. I just want the prophetic voice to speak directly to them. You know what I'm
yes.
saying? And I think sometimes it goes back to,
We started attacking one another, and
that's
it's
right.
so
We don't want to devour
counterproductive.
each other.
There, yeah. And gosh, I mean, there's so few of us doing this work, and especially doing it well. And so, and this is a thing that I've, I guess, observed over the last several years. And we have been around long enough to see some um, folks who were advocates who have burnt out.
Yeah,
They burn bridges as well because they start attacking other advocates, and so they end up with no platform at all in the long run. And so what I feel is that we've been in this long enough to look back and say, okay, what's worked is working, trying to work within the system as best we can. Yes, there are
right.
times where we're not going to be able to get through, and we basically cut ties then. But if we can, then that makes a difference. And so um, thank you. Kathy's putting all sorts of links, including our Protect the Flock, which is the free training next week. I told you I wasn't going to keep you on here too long, Chris. I
Mhm.
just want to kind of wrap it up by saying this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and Call to Peace Ministries. It's our really the busiest month of the year for us. We want to raise awareness, but the other thing we do is it's our largest fundraiser of the year, and we're trying to come up with money because unfortunately we need it to run. We
Yep.
have I was telling Chris before we came live that we got 29 requests. We have had 29 requests for advocates that since the beginning of October. Guys, we cannot keep up with that pace unless we bring on more helpers. And
Yep.
so right now we're in the middle of or near the end of our fundraiser, and we're still about $35,000 short.
Yep.
So we we want to provide healing. Getting angry and trying to change doctrine are great things, but what Call to Peace does is provide healing support groups. We provide connections to therapists and counselors who understand domestic abuse. We provide advocacy, one-on-one advocacy for people when they call when we can, and we want to be able to continue to do that. And we have the church partnership program going in and helping churches get it, and helping victims within their churches by helping work through cases. And so we do so much, and but we cannot do it without your help. So
Yep.
that's where I'm leaving it to you, because you always say that you send people to Call to Peace, right? So
Absolutely. No,
yeah,
and it goes back to just the heart of this particular discussion. If Joy wanted to, guys, and she could, if Joy wanted to, she could just rail and rant behind a keyboard, and it wouldn't cost her anything. It wouldn't cost the ministry anything. There wouldn't be much overhead. And I'm really not trying to lambaste those that do that. But if Joy wanted to just be a blogger, God bless her, she could do it. But God's called her instead to network and to build these networks and systems that are actually affecting change in the church and among the lives of people who are suffering. And that just requires a great deal of investment. And I'm telling you, I don't think there's a better investment for affecting change at the local level right now in Christian ministry affecting domestic abuse than Called to Peace. I mean, it's the greatest system we have right now of directly helping victims on the ground through a local church environment. And yes, education's a big piece of that. And we've just praised the Lord that Called to Peace continues to provide education. Church partnerships, huge part of that. I love the church partner program. But honestly, deploying, training, releasing advocates into Great Commission ministry that's going to serve victims is something that Called to Peace does better than anybody on the planet. And so there's just no need to debate the issue here. If Called to Peace says they need $35,000 to meet their goal to continue to train advocates, then it's up to us, right, to provide that at whatever level we can. So easy math is if there's 35 churches that have yet to give to Call to Peace, giving $1,000 is an easy ask for a church. If there's somebody watching right now and you know that you have that, it's not going to be a hard sell for you to give $1,500, $2,500. I'm telling you right now, this is the place to do it. And some people will ask me, well, Chris, don't you feel like you're competing? Well, no, we do very different things. And I will say that PeaceWorks made the commitment years ago that we were not going to accept donations easily. Now, some people get around it and they give us money and we just do what we can do with it. But when people ask us how to donate, our first response is, you need to give to one of our partner ministries. And Call to Peace is one of the first places that we send people because we want charitable giving to go directly to victims. And this is the avenue that we think best serves victims. So I'll tell you, I'm looking over, I was looking over my funds right now. I can't do much at this point in time, but I'll tell you what I will do. I'll start it off. I'm going to send Joy $200 right now, as soon as we get off for Call to Peace. And I'm going to challenge every other pastor that may be tuning into this video to do the same. If I can find $200, and I know what's going to happen with it, I know it's going to be used to train advocates that are going to care for victims, right? And if I can send Joy $200 today, then I think you guys maybe watching in, you could do $200 as well. Okay, so let's make it happen. We've only got the rest of this week to help them meet their goal. They need $35,000, and that's a drop in the bucket. God has all the money we'll ever need. And I tell my church this, I'll tell you this, and I'll land the plane. So I tell my church this all the time. We have all the money that we're going to need. That's the good news. The bad news is it's still in your wallet. So God has provided for Call to Peace. And for some of us watching this video right now, we're still holding on to it. So let's make this happen. Let's reach the goal, and then we'll all celebrate with Call to Peace at the end of the week. Cool?
Yeah. Yeah, what we want to do is actually get some more advocates on staff who can help with our local programs. So they would be advocate coordinators and things like that. Because honestly, folks, we are overwhelmed. I can't say it enough. We are overwhelmed, and we want to be able to respond to everybody who reaches out. But it's getting to that point that we're responding, but sadly we're not able to get to them because most of our advocates have full caseloads already. So just pray for us. And if the Lord puts it on your heart, we would really appreciate it. I put a link in the chat. And so there are some other comments, but again, we can always come back and answer those questions, comments we might have missed. We're just very grateful. Chris, I am so grateful for you. You're like in my top people. I don't know if I've topped 20 outside my family or something. He's like, I appreciate your heart, and it's we've worked together enough that I know your heart is for victims of abuse. I've seen it, and I'm grateful for you. And it really kind of bothers me sometimes when people start going, well, because he's associated with this or associated with that, then he can't be a good advocate. That is not true. They're good advocates who are men, and we've had many of them go through our advocacy training, including all of our church partnership liaisons. So
Yeah. Well, I can tell you if my saying is this, you've heard me say it. If everybody's happy with you in this work, you're probably doing it wrong.
yeah.
So, and I'm connected to a lot of people. So let's be honest. Once people find out who I'm connected to, a lot of people get upset. To my right and to my left.
Right. Yeah. And this is the problem with the United States right now. We cannot, we have to go from one side to the other. There's no middle ground, no trying to understand one another.
Yeah.
It's like stand on one side and judge. And that's kind of not who I've ever been.
Why
So
can't we be friends?
exactly.
Right.
Oh, if I
And
just had
hey, folks, this is how easy it is. In the time Joy was giving her last little spiel, I hit the send button and $200 just flew out of my phone and went to Call to Peace. So
amazing.
it's that
Thank you.
easy, right? So the ball's in your court. Let's finish this fundraiser out strong.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And I guess we will thank you for straining your already strained voice to do this for us.
Yes.
So,
This is not, this is some fat, but I'm kind of swollen right through here. So yeah, if y'all think of me, pray for my voice, that we'll figure out what's wrong and that I'll be able to do the right things to protect it. I kind of need it, I think. I don't know.
yeah.
The Lord may see differently.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris. Thank you, everybody. We will see you again soon. I think we have I don't know when our next live stream is, but there's a graphic that shows all of them. We've got a big week coming up.
Yep.
Laura is interviewing a guy named Patrick Weaver. I haven't met yet. I'm going to try to get on and meet him. And then Leslie Vernick, and I've got Darby Strickland coming on, I think tomorrow. So guys, stay tuned. We've got a lot of information coming up this week. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, guys.